afternoon, everyone. It's really nice to be here. And before I get into talk about the topic itself, I just, to the point Catherine made, just to give a little bit more context around what HMH do, and just set a little bit of context for the type of environment that our teams are operating in. Before I get into talk about some of our experiences in trying to build that strong team culture. So, move this on. There we go. So, in terms of what HMH do, HMH is very much focused on the educational technology sector, and our primary market is in the US, where through the solutions that we offer, we have a user base of over 50 million users, and that's focused on the K-12 market, the kindergarten to 12 years of age. So where does Dublin fit into this? Well, although our corporate headquarters are based out of Boston, and we have engineering teams based there, our largest engineering function is actually based out of Dublin, where we have over 150 engineers working on the design and development of our flagship learning platform called Ed, and also full responsibility for our data practice. Now, why is that important? Well, over the past couple of years, we've been on something of a transformation. So under the guidance of our new CEO, Jack Lynch, we've been moving away from what is a very traditional sort of educational publishing company focused on great content, looking to move to a learning company that's focused on great outcomes. Now, it was described to me as moving away from what was the thud effect. And I didn't really understand that until somebody said, well, a number of years ago, salespeople used to walk into the classroom, and when they dropped the books on the desk, the louder the thud, the more impressive it was. Now, that doesn't really scale when you look at the digital space. And what we're trying to do is provide a more tailored experience where we do still want that great content, but when we provide it, we want to tailor it more towards supporting the teacher and the student in the classroom. And through their interaction with that content, we can pull data from that, we can provide some data insights back, we can provide things like recommendations, and all of that is sort of building towards providing better student outcomes. So with that sort of strategy in place, that obviously filters its way right down through the organization. And I think that's when we look at it from a team culture point of view. So culture, I suppose, is one of those intangible things, but I think we would all say that we recognize a strong team culture when we see it. So typically when we see a strong team culture, it's a team that's collaborating well, they're communicating, there's high value social interactions, and I think most important of all, they're supporting each other. So when I was thinking about how best to sort of present sort of our experiences around team culture, rather than go through with a series of slides, I decided to use this graphic. Now I appreciate there's a lot going on here, so what we're going to do is spotlight a couple of these areas and sort of focus in on those. So the first one that I want to look at in terms of going a little bit deeper is in the area of leadership. Now before I start, I do want to give a shout out to my colleagues in UX design that have managed to make me about 20 years younger. I really appreciate it. My son saw it, my 7-year-old son saw it at the weekend and said, it doesn't look like anything like you, Dad. And when I said, why not? He said, there's no wrinkles. So 7-year-olds, no filter. So it just comes straight out. But in terms of where, from a leadership point of view, myself and my leadership team, we're really trying to create the environment in which a strong team culture can thrive. So we want, where it can flourish and where we get engagement from employees. Because we can set up teams with a clear direction and a sense of purpose, but also then we need to provide that encouragement and allow them to grow and really perform at their best. And I think when you look at where the company is going, the focus on technology and in turn engineering, will be very much to the forefront in trying to create that future value innovation that the company is very much striving for, that differentiation that we need to achieve. And that's where getting the employees engaged is so critical, because engaged employees, they're more enthusiastic about their work and their workplace. They are psychologically owners of the work that they're involved in and can really sort of help drive performance and the overall organization forward. But we're also conscious, I suppose, that from an overall leadership point of view, that yes, at the management level is critically important, but we also want to look at how do we get those leadership skills in at the team level. So last year what we started was a series of P2P leadership learning groups. And the goal of this is to try and provide the leadership skills that our teams need on a day-to-day basis. So typically it's a team or a group of around 8 people, and there's a set curriculum that they follow where they look at things such as different aspects of leadership, but things like leading the work, leading the team, leading the system. And these will be topics such as things like types of communication, like nonviolent communication, team effectiveness, looking at different studies around that like Hackman, And also then looking at things like frameworks, which like SCARF, which is there for kind of collaboration and influencing. And what we found is that over the course of the year, it's been really successful. We've got over 60 people now participating in these groups, and it's really helped instill a sense of some leadership skills within the broader teams themselves, and it's something that we're very conscious that they can use in their day-to-day. So with that in mind, we're looking to expand that out further, but also what we're looking to do, I suppose, is broaden it out beyond Dublin and actually have it in some of the other sites as well. So moving on, I suppose, to the core piece of it here, the teams themselves. So when we set up a team, we're looking to obviously give them a clear purpose, etc., but we also want to make sure that the skills and experience are right. So every team that we create will have a product owner, they'll have somebody from our product design team assigned to them. And I suppose very much following along sort of the Hackman school of thought, that team forming and the team launching. A critical first step that we do, and it's one of these small things, but it works really well, is that when the team is formed, you sit down, typically a session of about 2 to 4 hours, where it'll be facilitated by somebody outside of the team. And what they do is they really sit down and try and get to grips with what they're there to do, what their focus is, and then start to look at establishing their working arrangements, their working norms, the ways of working. And that would cover everything from definition of done to unit test coverage to kind of their even pull request process. So again, really sort of getting into the guts of that and getting a full understanding across the team. And what we found is that by giving that ownership to the teams themselves, even though we can set targets and sort of directives at the management level, by the teams owning that and saying to them from conception through to production, you own it, you build it, you support it. What we found is that teams are much more likely to come forward with, here's how we want to really sort of work together, here's the bar that we're setting for ourselves. And that's been really important in sort of instilling that sense of ownership and getting the type of behaviors that we want to see within the team. So as they talk about things such as we mentioned, like their ways of working and the release process and all of that, what we're very conscious of is that with that sense of autonomy and with those behaviors established, that we'll see other team members sort of align to that and other teams actually respond to that as well. A few months ago, there was a series of podcasts that were done by News Talk, and they featured Stuart Lancaster. And for those that don't know Stuart Lancaster, he's the former English rugby union coach. He's now a member of the Leinster rugby coaching team. But he's very passionate about the areas of leadership, and each week they had different topics. But there was one week they were talking about team dynamics and performance and the use of performance psychologists. But one of the things that struck with me was that when they talked about the different research, what they found is when they pulled it together is that 70% of a person's behavior is influenced by the environment that they're in at that time. And I think that really speaks to us trying to set up the right conditions for our teams, being aware of what's going on, and then the teams themselves will respond to that, so getting the right conditions in place. So all of this, I suppose, then, as you look, is sort of building what we're looking to do is engineering teams being seen as really effective partners for our product teams. So building that trust, being a trusted partner in the work that we're taking on. So the work that's happened over the last couple of years, I think what we're seeing is some of that sort of come to fruition in terms of the sort of partnership between ourselves and the product team. So a couple of recent examples. We're going through with Ed actually a major redesign of one of the key functions. And we're at that sort of early ideation stage around the design. But what was, again, one of these small things that happened was that the product design team invited a number of our engineers to take part in this early stage workshop. And it was a real vote of confidence, I think, for the engineering team. But coming back from that, what struck me was, the engineers was the enthusiasm around what was being done. They'd identified some kind of short-term wins for what we call our back-to-school period for September of this year, and also longer term. But very much sort of buying in to what was being done, that commitment was there, and that engagement was happening. And I think, again, it just speaks to the timing of when that conversation happened, and the timing of that invite helped sort of infuse the team there with that sort of clear sense of direction. Another area we're fortunate in Dublin is that we have a number of our product owners sitting with the development teams in Dublin, but we also have other product owners based in the US. We had them all over in Dublin a couple of weeks ago, and it was a really good week. It was workshops across multiple different areas, but one of the areas that we were very conscious of focusing on was about how we get the balance right between new feature development and technical debt and maintenance. So on a new platform like Ed, there's obviously a huge push to get new features on, whether it's from, trying to gain parity with the competition, or indeed trying to create some sort of differentiation. So what we said, look, that's great, we want to do that, but we also want to make sure is that we're not ignoring where we need to be focused around the technical-led maintenance. But we didn't want it to be a conversation where we're just making a rule, it's 30% capacity, we'll do with what we need to from a technical debt. We wanted sort of to be a joint decision where we as an engineering function can articulate the value of why the purpose of it is, and that the product team understand that and are bought into that, so that it's very much, again, a joint decision or a conversation around how we're moving it forward. So coming out of that, for typically what we do in our 3-month release planning cycle, we'll have the different lines of business feeding in their prioritized requirements, and now what we have is engineering being another line of business in which initiatives like I mentioned, platform maturity, that can be cross-cutting across teams, etc., will now be part of that prioritization exercise. And I think that's been, again, just speaking to the work that's been done, but also just establishing a really good relationship with our product team. And a lot of that, I think, comes down to the next item, which is around that communication part of it, and communication being the key, being open and transparent around what we're doing and why we're doing it. So it's 6 months. Monthly project review meeting. And this was an open invite to anybody in the company, whether executives and sales function, wherever they might be, to come along and hear what's happening within the engineering function. So we spend typically a Thursday afternoon, and we start and we work our way through all the different projects that are underway, what's happened in the last month, what's happening in the following month, where we stand, what's the current status, what's going well, what's not. And what's interesting is that even though initially there was some reluctance to that, it was seen as maybe a little bit of oversight on how is this going to, we're going to be kind of scrutinized around this. But what's come out of it is actually more, I suppose credit for the engineering organization about you're laying all your cards on the table, you're taking us through all the work that you're doing and what's happening. And that transparency, they said, is really refreshing. So even though it's a lot of work every month, to sort of stand up and get all of this prepared, what we're seeing is that sort of, I suppose, feedback from other sections within the company that, again, looking to build that partnership and that trust element with, the other stakeholders that we're working with. Yeah. So I think in terms of then sort of bringing this all back together again, so many different other aspects could be looked at, but for me, it really comes back down to the team itself. A couple of years ago, there was an article in Wired magazine, and it featured an individual called Bob Taylor, who, to be honest, I hadn't heard of, but the headline was, Bob Taylor, something along the lines of the tech legend you've never heard of, but who's invented almost everything. And what was interesting about Bob Taylor was that he was at the forefront of some of the, I suppose, the things that underpin a lot of modern computing today. He worked on ARPANET, he worked in Xerox PARC, and was involved in all of these initiatives, but what his key passion was around bringing together the best and the brightest and then getting them together to work as a team, because he really felt that what could be achieved as a team far surpassed that of even the best individual, and sort of harnessing that energy within the team dynamic was of critical importance to him. And he used to speak about he had a motto, which I think was an old Japanese proverb, which he used to say in his office of, none of us is as smart as all of us. And I thought that was a really nice way of thinking about how you want to set your teams up and the type of culture that you're striving for. Because for us, I suppose, in HMH, the work that we're doing around that thing of the openness and the transparency, the communication side of it, building that trust, standing up the teams, getting them focused, getting a clear sense of direction, everything that we do on the day-to-day, week-on-week, month-on-month, is intended to put in place the foundations that will allow a strong team culture to thrive and ultimately achieve the kind of great outcomes that the company is looking for, but I think most importantly, also achieve the great outcomes that most of our students are looking for as well. Thank you for listening.
7, 6, 8 values, and they try to get alignment from the candidates to those values.
Yeah.
Your math's insane.
It is. Now, can I just
How do you
say,
go around it?
so let's just say that's an internal one. So the reason I wanted to share it was something that the teams have put together around how they view how we operate day to day and what we're striving for. So it wasn't something that I'd put out on maybe a customer facing website because it is a little bit dazzling. So that's why I was conscious of it. But I felt it was genuine in terms of how they see the operation, how they operate day to day, not necessarily something that we would use from a marketing point of view. It would need to be slimmed down a little.
Hey, how's it going? Yeah, I just have one question about how you sort of measure like the success of all the things you're doing to improve culture.
Yeah.
Like, are there specific metrics you're looking around happiness, productivity? What are the sort of things you're looking at to track?
Yeah, so it's a combination of things. Unfortunately, there isn't just that one KPI that you can kind of go to all the time. So there's things that even this morning, I just got an employee engagement survey, sort of a follow-up to one that was actually done a number of months back. And what we did, so there was a major one that was done, I think around August of last year, and coming out of that, there was a number of different actions. But the follow-on from that was a shortened one, but actually with each department now being able to put in specific questions around their function. So from an engineering point of view, I think there was 9 questions in total, 3 of which were now engineering specific. So what we were looking for there was, well, let's rate us, but also tell us where we can be better. What is the 1 or 2 things that are really stopping you from being effective in your day-to-day job? So we use that survey one at the sort of the company level, and at the engineering level, what we're doing with each teams on a quarterly basis is sort of that touch point where they fill out sort of their adherence to agile practices, and again, sort of how they feel about how they're working, whether they feel the autonomy that they need is there and all of that. So we're using that as a sort of a guidance to say, well, some teams may be performing quite well, but due to certain circumstances, we're seeing maybe that tail off a little bit. So it's a nice sort of way of just getting some insight into what's happening, but not just doing it on a yearly basis, but doing it every quarter and sort of like that heartbeat check with the teams. So there's other things that we do as well, obviously, as you can appreciate from a metrics point of view in terms of our development side, but in terms of just trying to get inside the head of our engineers, basically, that's sort of what we're found to be most effective.
Hi there. Just curious how you integrate user testing into the design development process.
So the user testing, actually, there's a couple of things that we do there. So we actually run a series of sort of field tests that we do. So when you look at the educational market, it's interesting that the people who actually buy our software aren't necessarily the people that use it. So you end up with the district administrators making purchasing decisions on behalf of the teachers. So, and then obviously you've got the students who use it as well. So you can appreciate if you've got kindergarten to 12 years of age, trying to customize your UI to manage for that age range is actually quite challenging. And in many cases, you've actually got a situation where the students in the classroom are more tech savvy than the teachers themselves, which is a whole other challenge. So what we're looking at, we do a number of field tests where, from a teacher's point of view, so we'll have our teacher flows and the various functions, then we'll have it from the student side. And we go in, we get a sample panel, we go through it, we video, record all of that, and from that there's questionnaires, and that then feeds back into sort of the nature of the changes that we want to see. So part of what we're trying to do with the revamp on one of the major areas around discovering content is, again, listening to that feedback from those field tests to understand where are those pain points and what can we address quickly ahead of back to school, and what are the longer term needs that we need to take on.
We have one question over here that I missed, did we? No? That's fine. Thank you so much, that was great. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Aidan.